Shopify is a global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business and sell more with less effort thanks to the Shopify Magic, your AI-powered all-star. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/redcircle, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/redcircle now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/redcircle.
It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply.
You're listening to Make It, the indie film podcast. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Make It podcast. I'm your host, Chris Barkley.
And I am the fantastic Mr. Fox, a.k.a. Nicholas Bugs.
And helping us steer this podcast ship to its conclusion is producer Papa Bear and intern Sam. Fellas, say hello.
Hello.
And of course, with us is our
perfectly timed.
It was perfectly timed. With us is our esteemed guest, director, producer, Rich Hull. Rich, what's going on?
Hello.
Welcome to the Make It podcast. We're really excited to have you on, and we are going to talk about I'm just guessing based on the sort of pre-recording chat, this can go a million directions, which sounds like just my type of podcast, which is totally fine. But just to keep us on track right away, can you tell us a little bit about and tell the audience as well what we might know you for, what you've worked on in the past, and what you're excited about and working on now?
That's I could talk for 2 hours about that alone, man.
Let's do it.
So I've been in media and entertainment for, I guess, about 30 years now. I'm based in Los Angeles, but I grew up in Texas and went to school at Vanderbilt, just like Nick. And
let's go.
So I started my career as a film producer. I made 25 or 30 different movies at this point. I also started a streaming service that I started about 10 years ago. I was teaching a film finance class at UCLA and getting all these questions about digital and this Netflix thing. It sounds like it's going to be big. And so I started a streaming service that is now called VIX, V-I-X. It's we sold that 3 years ago to Univision. It's the largest Spanish language streaming service in the world. And then most recently, I wrote, co-directed, and produced what I think is my 28th film, but it's my first as a director. It's a documentary that Chris Pratt and I made together called Fighting Spirit, a combat chaplain's journey. And it's been a crazy 4-year journey on that one as well. So I'm sure we can dig into the weeds on that thing, but it's been a really fascinating experience and a really interesting partnership with the US Army, which is actually my second partnership with the US Army. Halle Berry and I made a documentary years ago about black soldiers that fought in all the U.S. wars we ever had called For Love of Liberty, the story of America's Black Patriots. And she and I won the NAACP Image Award and a bunch of other awards for that. And so this is actually my second collaboration with the Army, and it's been a really amazing experience, which we can surely talk more about.
Yeah, here.
Very cool.
What a career. And I just want to say, I really would not be here without the U.S. Army. My grandfather served for 20 years in the military, and he adopted my father, so without that military experience and my grandfather being overseas in Germany, I literally would not be sitting here in front of you. So it means a lot to me anytime I see someone make any film about the military that sort of sheds a light on the work they do, but to make two is really remarkable. I do want to just help the audience out here. I'm sure most of the audience, we have a really smart audience. I'm sure most of them know what this is. But just in case, can you describe what a combat chaplain is? What are we talking about here?
Well, it's not a indication of smart or not smart if you don't know what a combat chaplain is, because when I started this project, I didn't know what a combat chaplain is. But I think that's kind of the beauty of what we've done here, is that we've brought these untold stories of this completely unknown profession to most people to the big screen. And I think that's part of the journey that audiences go on, is they get this peek into this super interesting world that they never knew existed. So a combat chaplain, all branches of the military have chaplains. Chaplains are on Army bases and military hospitals, but the combat chaplains are the tip of the spear. So combat chaplain wears a uniform. They go to battle, but they carry no weapon, which means you really got to scratch your head to figure out why in the world somebody does that job. You
mean like a kicker on a football team?
Something like that. I would say maybe more of a punter, but okay.
Right.
So these guys go to combat with no weapon, and that's just bananas to me. And I was fascinated by that. I wanted to understand what would make somebody do that. And so obviously it's motivated by something much larger, probably something hard to put into words. It's not a job you do for the paycheck. It's really more of a calling. Mm-hmm. And so we had never seen the collision of that, which is a profession motivated by love, colliding with the chaos of war. And that intersection is, I've never seen that movie. And so I wanted to go in and explore that. And I didn't originally start as the director, but as I got more and more into the subject matter, kind of raised my hand and said, I think I want to direct this. And I was originally brought on just as a producer because the Army wasn't paying attention to some guys that wanted to make this movie. And because of the project that Hallie and I did years ago, they thought, oh, you'll probably have a little trust with the military. And turns out they were right. And they were like, it's just one phone call. You got to do just one phone call to get the military on board. Because you don't want to make a movie like this without the military being on board, right? You want to be able to shoot, current military people in full uniform. You want to shoot on Army bases, and you want to tap into their super extensive archives. So I was able to get the military on board. And then, you kind of know the rest of the story. It's like death by 1,000 cuts. Like one phone call turned into a lot of phone calls and more and more and more. But once I gotten deep on the subject matter, I was like, oh, this is interesting. I want to write and direct this. And it's been an amazing journey. So I put into a world I didn't even know existed, with people I didn't even know existed. And that's the fun of it, is that it's like, these are untold stories. Combat chaplains, they go out and they like the spotlight to be on the soldiers. Like, they're there to serve the soldiers who serve us as Americans. And they like it serving in anonymity. Like, they don't like to be part of the story. And that actually turned out to be a big problem for us, because we had to drag these stories out of these guys and ladies who don't like to go out and tell their story. And that's why you asked that question, Chris, is what do combat chaplains do? Because we don't know about that as Americans. Right. And that was fascinating for me. And it's also like one of these weird things where a chaplain might come from a particular faith background, and all faiths are represented, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, you name it. But when you're out there on the front lines and bullets are whizzing by your head, you're dealing with soldiers of all faiths and no faith, and you're dealing with very existential life and death questions. And all that was just so fascinating to me. And so I decided to direct it.
Well, I like the fact that you actually delved into probably more than what we see in movies. So if you had said combat chaplain to me, I'm like, oh yeah. I mean, when someone's dying or someone has died, then you always see a chaplain come in. I feel like that's it. That is the extent to what we get to see. So the fact that you're getting in there and having these conversations about what is a day in the life like what is their experience like, not just that little piece that we get to see. You literally, like you said, probably opened up the world for maybe, I'm not saying everybody, but almost everybody, because that's all we get to see. So I love that you did that.
Well, I think that's what I liked about it is, I the first thing I did is there was a guy named Jeff Strucker, and Jeff is a former Army Ranger who became a combat chaplain due to his experience in the Black Hawk Down incident. So you remember the movie Black Hawk Down? He's portrayed in that movie, and he sort of had this battlefield experience where he was like, I'm okay dying, but if I die, I'm going to make some changes. And I mean, if I don't die. And so he didn't die. And so he made some changes. And so I had remembered that from Black Hawk Down. We reached out to him and said, hey, would you be interested in, being involved in this movie, letting us tell your story? And he said, sure. And so then we reached out to the Army Chaplain Corps, and they said yes. And then we reached out to Chris Pratt, who became my producing partner on this, and he said yes. And everybody just kept saying yes and yes. And the thing kind of took on a life of its own, and it was because of those individual stories that were just so fascinating when you really, start to peel back the layers of the onions with these people. And, we're talking in a week where part of the story came to an end because the movie came out for Veterans Day in theaters in what is really one of the biggest documentary theatrical releases of the year. We had this kind of weird journey with it in the sense that we applied to 30 different film festivals and got a clean sweep, like denied at all of them. And
oh, wow.
With the possible exception, we did a preview of an unfinished version of the film at the Newport Beach Film Festival last year. Mm-hmm. And so finally we were like, we're going to have to figure out a different way to get this movie out there. So we decided to raise a little bit more money and release it theatrically. We got a distributor, and then we made it a one-day kind of giant event for Veterans Day. And we ended up deciding that we would give tickets away for free to military families. And that would allow them to come to the theater and, kind of see it together and have that experience together. And that turned out to be a great choice because we ended up that got picked up by like every major press outlet and hundreds of influencers who were out talking about it to, I think at the last count, it was like 120 million social followers. And, people were just so enamored by this kind of funky, almost nonprofit strategy, if you will, of just giving out free military tickets. Yeah. And that created this groundswell of interest and goodwill. And then the movie sort of like blew up, which was amazing. We're actually, we are the only documentary released this year that's got 100% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. And so what the film festival directors may not have seen in terms of not letting us into their film festivals, I think the audiences saw. And that's what's so interesting about it is that like we figured out a way to like get it out to audiences and then they reacted. Like we literally have had 100% positive reviews, like glowing reviews from, the really big guys, the ABC Newses and the Fox News and whomever, all the way down to pretty much every military publication, every faith-based publication, tons of, you name it. And it's just been such a weird, unique experience. And, that was literally a few days ago. So we're like right in the thick of things, kind of really feeling so good about where the movie wound up and being, super proud of it and being thrilled that audiences felt the same way because, I mean, Nick, I was just at Vanderbilt a few weeks ago, our alma mater, and I know Chris was in Nashville, and they did an advanced screening of the movie. And so I've sort of been on this tour for the last couple months to do advanced screenings and kind of preview the movie before the kind of big theatrical Veterans Day event.
Right there in Surratt Cinema.
Yeah, man. And I hadn't been in there really since I was an undergrad. I think actually Halle Berry and I came and we did a little preview of the Black Soldiers movie that we did 10 years ago. That was the last time I was there. But before that, it was when I was, an undergrad. And like, by the way, it hadn't changed a bit. The
cinema itself is the exact same. If you turn your head to the left and walk up the hall, you won't even recognize it because I don't recognize it. It's totally different. But I love the fact that cinema is the same. It is. It's really cool. Nostalgia.
It was great because I've sat through these screenings and the lights come up in these theaters and you get to see the audience reactions. And so I kind of knew that we had something special, but I couldn't quite prove it because I would see how the audiences would react. And you would get these at Vanderbilt, 3 guys came up to me afterwards, tears rolling down their face, big dudes, former Marines, not the guys you want to meet in a bar fight. And they gave me a big hug and were like, telling me their experience with the movie. And it was so powerful for me because, I think what started out for them as making them recollect their experiences in the military became a journey where ultimately they were tears of joy at the end, because they were like, oh my gosh, somebody finally gave voice to my experience in the military in a way that I maybe couldn't have done. And now I can tell my friends, my family, my community about what that was like for me.
Yes.
By pointing to this movie. Because what's so crazy for me, and I'm a non-veteran, and my dad was a veteran, my uncle was a veteran, my co-director on this movie, Justin Roberts, is a veteran. That was really important because we wanted to be sure that we were kind of viewing these stories we were entrusted to tell through a veteran lens to make sure they had authenticity. But when I talk to veterans, all of them, 100% of them, have a story about a chaplain. And it may be just a moment where like the chaplain influenced their life, or it could be like a big moment where the chaplain saved their life. And so that's what these guys were coming up and saying to me, like, oh, I want to tell you my story about the chaplain. And he did something really special for me. And like, that's a powerful experience. And then general audiences are finding something very different in it. They're finding this peek into the world that we were talking about earlier that they just didn't know existed. And that's a fun journey. And I'm biased, but I think they like the storytelling. And then faith-based audiences are kind of finding something in it, which I didn't necessarily expect. I think they kind of view it as like an opportunity to, very unique situation, but an opportunity to show this like very unique world where you kind of get to live your faith, no matter what faith you come from, kind of every day. But you got to do it in a way that is universally accessible to all the soldiers that are out there. And these are heavy issues, man.
Dangerous.
It's really, it's crazy. And
Chris, I know you've got a
bring
point.
that up, and it made me think about the festival rejection.
That's exactly. I was going to go there too, Chris. So you hit it.
Do you think that the type of film it is created a political bias at these festivals?
I think so, but unintentionally. Like, there's nothing political about this. The chaplains are not political. Combat's not political, for our purposes. And the movie's not political in the slightest. Mm-hmm. But I think that they probably may have seen that, which was not intended. But the politics of it all did influence our choice to go theatrical on Veterans Day, because yes, it's pretty obvious why we chose Veterans Day, big celebration of veterans. On the other hand, it was also 3 days after the U.S. presidential election, which can be a little divisive. Yes. And so we thought, like, wouldn't it be cool if people from all different walks of life could come into a theater with people in their community that they may not agree on everything with, but find common ground around the role that combat chaplains play? Like, how cool would that be? Like, that how healing and awesome would that be,
Right, yeah.
And so that really played into our decision as well. And we rushed hard to get this out, because the next kind of obvious time to release this would be Memorial Day in May. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But we were like, no, man, this is right after the presidential election. Like, this can be a source of healing for the country. And I think to a certain extent, that's proved to be true. Like, I think, the country, they don't want a feel-bad movie right now. They want a feel-good and inspiring movie, Like, if you want feel-bad, you can turn on the news or,
a lot of places look at Twitter.
Like, there's a lot of places you can get that, But, like, they want to be inspired. And I think that kind of proved itself out, by doing this kind of unique, almost giant one day, focus all your efforts on that one day on 125 plus screens across the country. Like, I think that worked, and I
but it's inspiring though, Rich. Yeah, because one of the things that I'm thinking about doing now, so my father-in-law is a veteran, Air Force, he did Vietnam. And as he gets a little bit older, the family is always asking him questions about things like, tell us, especially they're his kids, right? Dad, like, tell us about these experiences. He's a storyteller. He tells a lot of things. Now it's just like, let's just hear it all, right? Let's hear it all. But that's one question we haven't asked that I plan on asking, which is, can you share a chaplain story? And one of the things that you said was you kind of put all that energy into getting this thing out on that one day, making that work. But I think that there is a lasting effect that it could have, because the first thing that I'm thinking of is when you mentioned the soldier coming up to you or the veteran coming up to you and having a conversation at Vandy and saying that I wanted to share my story. So the first thing I think of is how cool would it be to have that social movement, and I mean just social media, where people do hashtag chaplain stories. Just do that. It can exist forever, but put that out there, because I think it's probably an amazing story to tell. And to your point, that chaplain story might actually be from a Christian veteran who received some sort of advice, support, or hope from a Muslim chaplain. Like, you never know what kind of stories you're going to get, because again, they had to support everybody. So I think that in itself could be the chaplain stories could be something that is just inspired by what you did,
like his own
and continues
version
forever.
Of Brandon Stanton, right?
Yeah. Basically, people of New York, that kind of
New
thing.
York,
Yeah.
his own people. In New York.
Look, I should have talked to you last week, man. That's a good idea. But we did that. It happened organically. We didn't actually have to make it happen. We don't have chaplain stories as a hashtag. But what would happen is Chris Pratt would go and he'd post something about the film, and he was incredibly generous and gracious to do it, especially in a week where he was having a baby. He just had a new baby boy. And so,
shout out to Chris
and he's
Pratt.
got 2 movies that are like in production, and like literally like the timing for him couldn't have been worse. And he found time to, really be vocal to his 50 million Instagram followers. And when he would post something, it would organically happen that people were chiming into the comments, and they were all leaving those stories. And it was really cool and powerful. And, to go back and even just scroll through those is really, really, really neat. And you saw that across not just Chris Pratt's posts, but, everybody that was posting about it. Even me, when I, to my minor amount of social media followers, like people were chiming in, telling me those stories. And I think that's part of the reason the Army Chaplain Corps became our partner on this, because it's the first time they've ever partnered with Hollywood. Again, they don't like their stories told. They like to serve in anonymity. And so they did it, I think, because the Army is having a tough time recruiting soldiers, and recruitment is down. And, the Chaplain Corps is, not immune to that. So think about 100% of the people that I talk to who are veterans who've got a chaplain story. Well, cut to 10 years in the future, what a shame that would be if there were only 50% of those people that had a chaplain story, And so I think for them, they realized that shining a spotlight on what the combat chaplains do is a way to tell their story, drive some recruitment as well. And, what was interesting about it is, like, when you see the movie, it's a very honest story. Like, there's some good and there's some bad about being a chaplain. Chaplains deal with a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
As one of the guys who's a Muslim chaplain says in the movie, nobody ever comes to you on their best day, ever. And so, and so like you get heaped a lot of stuff on you as a combat chaplain. And one of the chaplains in the film called that combat fatigue, like compassion fatigue. And so that, to me, that's like a really interesting phrase, because as someone said in the movie, when you go to war, you come out and you've got these scars on your soul, which also I think is a really powerful phrase. And so you can become a better person, but you're going to be different no matter what. Those scars on your soul, they make everybody different. Well, the chaplains are not immune to that. And so we decided that we would look at that and talk about that and, tell that part of the story too. So it's kind of dangerous for the US Army Chaplain Corps to have been our partner on this. But we felt like we couldn't just make it a puff piece where you only tell one side of the story. We wanted to have it be an honest portrayal so that it would have authenticity. And honestly, I think that's what audiences are responding to so well. Yeah. And when I have those screenings, over the last few months, like, I think that touches people in a certain way. And like, we started those screenings, by the way, at the Pope's house. So that's a weird thing, which is, but like, we got invited to start our advanced screening tour by the Pope in his private screening room at his house.
You screen at the Vatican, right? Or no, or like
near but it's not just the Vatican. Like, the Vatican City has got their own theaters and stuff. Like, this is in the Pope's house. So he has a screening room built in 900 AD. It's an old chapel. The sound is horrible. If you had that as a screening room in LA, nobody'd go to it.
Right.
But you walk in, you go through the Swiss Guard, you go into his compound. Like my wife and I have some pictures of us standing in the Pope's driveway. You're like, really? The Pope's got a driveway? That's
Right.
I didn't think about that. And then you go in and you feel kind of the weight of history and the people that have been invited to screen their movies in this little tiny screening room, or the household names of our industry, Martin Scorsese and people like that. And, it was such a unique way to kick this off, and then to kind of go through that tour of different advanced screenings like the one we did at Vanderbilt, and, to see how audiences react to it. And I think it's part of, I think that comes from the authenticity of telling kind of the good and the bad of what it's like to be a combat chaplain.
Well, I think now would be a perfect time to play this trailer and let the audience in on just a little taste of what you've been talking about. So we are going to play this trailer now.
For over 200 years, combat chaplains have provided the bedrock of care for every branch of the military.
Our chaplains are non-combatants. They go into a battle space without a weapon. You have to be fearless to do that.
That's me, comforting the injured soldier when I was a chaplain. But after I left the military, I struggled to make sense of my experiences when I got home.
Justin was definitely a different person when he got back.
And then, something completely unexpected happened.
Long-lost Army chaplain has finally been identified 70 years after his death.
Chaplain Emil Kapaon was one of the most famous, most heroic combat chaplains in history. As I had been there for so many others on the battlefield, I knew that I should be there when Chaplain Kapaon was laid to rest. And maybe it would help me sort through why I was feeling so lost. As I set off, I felt I was being led by the inspiring stories of combat chaplains of all faiths who came before me.
Chaplain Litkeep carried over 20 men for evacuation.
The 4 chaplains from the Dorchester, that is one of the greatest examples of chaplaincy.
I came to this moment where I realized it's time for you to stop preparing warriors to meet the enemy and start preparing them to meet eternity.
Being a chaplain is a quiet profession of service, and chaplains rarely make headlines. So I was shocked when I realized that people from all over the United States came together in the spirit of Emil Kapaon to honor him, and to honor the service of every one of us who has ever accepted this calling.
This is the valor we honor today. An American soldier who wielded love for his brothers so pure that he was willing to die so that they might live.
If you look at any war at any given time, a chaplain was there, equipped with a fighting spirit that provides a refuge in the fight.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, that backstory of the chaplain who passed 70 years ago and his remains being found, I guess that's the critical point. That's what the filmmaker, the people who wanted to make the film brought to you. Is that what happened?
Yeah. No, not at all.
Oh, wow.
No, the story. So we never intended to tell that story of that guy whose remains were found 70 years, after his death in a prisoner of war camp in Korea. His name is Father Emil Kapaon. He was a Catholic priest and a combat chaplain, and he was in this prisoner of war camp, being held by the Chinese. They gave him the opportunity to leave, and he said, "No, I'm going to stay here." And by the way, I'd have been out of there. Any of us would have been out of there. Yeah. And he stuck around knowing that it meant his certain death, and it did. So we had shot all the stories that we originally intended to tell, and we were in the edit room, probably halfway done with the whole movie, and we heard about Father Kapaon's remains being identified and that they were coming back to the U.S. and were going to be buried in a funeral in his hometown of Wichita, Kansas. And so we thought, we're not quite sure how this is going to fit into our work, but we should probably go shoot this. Seems kind of interesting. So we took my partner, Justin Roberts, who was co-directing the movie with me, who had been a former Army combat chaplain, had left the military, was back home at his, where he lives in Lake Charles, Louisiana. And we said, Justin, why don't you take a camera crew? Why don't you go to Father Kapaon's funeral and just film it and check it out? And at the time, Justin was really, I think, struggling with what life was going to be like for him post-military. What was the next chapter of his life going to be? It was hard for him to kind of define himself once he took that uniform off, which is a very common thing. And so he was struggling a lot, and he'd been in Afghanistan and he'd seen a lot, and he had a lot on his shoulders. And so when he went there to Father Kapaon's funeral, he was convinced, as we all were, that nobody was going to show up, and it was just going to be him and a casket. And when he got there, it was just like this huge thing. And if you know anything about the Catholic Church and the military, they know how to put on a pretty good show. And like the entire town shut down. People came from far and wide. And it was a celebration of this one chaplain, but really all combat chaplains. And so for Justin, when he saw that became so pivotal for him. And almost like his own healing experience, a journey, if you will, like the journey, it's in the title of the film, A Combat Chaplain's Journey. And we never quite tell you whose journey it refers to in the title of the film, because it could be Father Kapaon's journey, it could be Justin's journey, it could be all these other journeys of these stories that inspired Justin, who were combat chaplains that came before him. And there's been 419 combat chaplains who have died in battle in service of their country. And so we just picked a handful of those stories to tell. And that's what we thought we were going to tell. But this whole sort of weird left turn that we took with Father Kapaon's funeral, I think is really where the movie found its heartbeat. And it was sort of inspired by this movie. It was a documentary film a couple years ago called My Octopus Teacher. I don't know if you guys remember that.
It's a great film. Yes.
It's great, man. It's really awesome. Like, I'm an Academy member, so I love this time of year where I get to watch a movie a night.
Me too.
What I love about it is you discover these movies that haven't kind of found any audience yet. And, a lot of these movies don't even come out until months down the road. And as an Oscar voter, you get to see them early. And I remember my wife and I were sitting in our house and we watched, what's this octopus movie? Yeah, that sounds like weird. Octopus, that sounds weird. All right, sure, turn it on. And, and so we watched it and we were so moved by it. Well, the thing about that is, like, if you remember that movie, it was the life cycle of an octopus from birth to death. Mm. And they went and they shot it and then they cut it and it was a nature film and it was kind of boring. And so then they got it to like a friend of a friend who was a director in Hollywood. And he goes, tell me about the guy that actually shot this. What was going on in his life? And it turns out that guy had his own drama that he was going through. And so they went back after the fact, like years later, and they shot an interview with this guy for several days. And they wove those two storylines together. And when they did that, suddenly the movie found its voice. And that's what made it so powerful. Yeah. And so we kind of took the same inspiration and we were like, well, we didn't intend to tell this story about Justin and this journey and Father Kapaon and all that stuff, but like, let's go with it, because documentaries are weird, man. You make a plan at the beginning and the only thing you know for sure is that the plan's going to be wrong. And so we just kind of felt like, well, this is a sign from the universe. Let's just go with it. We'll figure it out. And I think that's what made the movie click, right? Because that's really where I think it ultimately found its voice. But we never intended to tell that story at all.
Well, I want to get into that a little bit because you said you spent 4 years on it. And just for this audience, so many filmmakers are in this audience. I wanted to get into a little technical with you before we get to polls, audience polls with Sam, intern Sam here. Can you tell us how long you were in pre-pro and what kind of cameras you shot on? And like, what was your approach from a filmmaking standpoint with this documentary?
No, I can't tell you that at all. It was just like, it was chaos the whole time. I mean, it's like, so one of my partners on the project is a guy named Frank Martin. Yeah. And Frank is a super accomplished Emmy-winning, Sundance-winning documentary filmmaker. And he worked a lot at the very beginning on the stories, thinking about the stories, identifying the stories, researching the stories, talking to people. And so he is the one that shot many of those interviews, and they look great. We shot them just like kind of off the grounds of the Pentagon. Everybody showed up in their full dress uniforms. Everybody looked awesome. We got to interview kind of senior military leaders, the chief of chaplains of each branch. Like, it was really a pretty powerful thing. And so a lot of those kind of early logistics were handled by Frank. But because the movie, like most documentaries, kind of just kept taking these turns, like, there was no pre-production. Yeah, we kind of prepped for the interviews and had to think about the questions, and, it takes a few weeks and whatever. I mean, it takes a year and a few weeks. It depends on how you look at it, right?
But I know post-in documentaries are a bear.
Oh, they're brutal. I mean, a movie like this is ultimately made in the edit room. And honestly, I think, part of the magic on this, too, came from the editors. So the editor is named Holly Stocking.
Shout out to Holly.
Shout out to Holly. Her daughter is Hannah Stocking, who's one of the biggest Instagram influencers in the world. It's got 25 or 30 million Instagram followers, and we cut half the movie.
Write that note down, Papa Bear.
Yeah.
Heather Stocking.
It's great. No, we shot we cut much of the movie in Hannah's upstairs extra bedroom, and she tolerated us. But Holly was chosen very intentionally, because when I really decided, like, I'm going to take over this movie and direct it, the stories are real action-packed, lots of testosterone, some blood and guts, and very male-oriented, right? Yeah. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be kind of interesting to view some of these stories through a female lens? And maybe that would give us a different perspective. And so that was kind of one of the boxes that Holly checked. And the other is that Holly has never cut a long form, film before. Wow. She's one of the most sought after film trailer editors in town, and has been for 25 years. And I thought, well, how do you tell a very complicated story in a short amount of time? Because that's what these little stories are. They're like little vignettes that we had intended to tell. And so I thought, well, who better to do that than a film trailer editor? They take a 2-hour movie and they cut it down into 3 minutes, right? So she checked that second box. And so much of this was like a stop and a start and a stop and a start. And then, like, Holly would get pulled into a trailer and she'd have to go, like, do that. And we'd pause for a couple of weeks and then we'd come back. And so it's unlike a scripted movie. Scripted movies are like supposed to be a well-oiled machine, right? Yeah. You prep for a certain amount of time, and that's pretty standardized. There's a very standard playbook. Everyone's different, but there's still kind of a standard playbook. Everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing, and it's a very defined amount of time. You shoot. You've got a schedule. It's really boarded out. It's perfectly timed and scheduled and all that stuff. And post is usually a certain amount of time. Documentaries are completely different, man. And it's one of the great things about them, because you can take the time for the movie to find its voice in a way that you generally can't in a scripted movie. Right. And so we did that. And that's why it ended up taking 4 years. But it wasn't that normal, like, what cameras are we going to use and how long are we going to prep? And it's a very different beast.
So, Rich, with your background in AI, do you also have a background in like software development at all? Because I'm going to make an analogy that I think that this hits for me. So I'll just drop it. So what it sounds like to me is that your typical film, your non-documentary, right, your narrative film, has a waterfall approach, whereas a documentary uses an agile approach. And in agile, it's really like you have an idea of where you want to go. You don't necessarily have to have the finished product in mind, but you need to start. And you work with the people, right? You have developers who are doing the, fingers on keyboards, but then you have the customer, the users that you're engaging with. And what you're doing is, and this is the interesting thing about Agile, is that you actually have what are called user stories, right? So you're developing these stories, and the stories help you to build components. So you build something, and you're like, hey, does this look good? You're like, yeah, this is perfect. But now we got to do the next user story. The collection of those user stories is what you get in the end, but it doesn't have that same waterfall approach, which is I know what my beginning, my middle, and my end looks like. I know what my documentation looks like, your script, your schedule, your locations. Let it breathe. We know we're going to get there because we're engaging the people that are part of this ultimate story, but we have to collect those individual stories first and then put it all together at the end. So I was just thinking that has definitely a very agile development type approach for a documentary versus narrative, and others would be more of a waterfall approach.
Nick, I didn't realize we were going to be nerding out with the technology part of my life.
Hey, you got to use all sides of our brains, right? Like that's the goal.
The whole time Nick is saying that, Papa Bear, I'm thinking to myself, Combat Chapel sounds like a really bad movie pitch. Right? like for an action movie, kind of like what's the Rock got right now? Red One that's coming out for the holidays. It's like Combat Chapel.
Chaplain, right?
Yeah. Combat Chaplain, yeah. Like, so you got these.
Oh, it's an action movie.
Yeah, it's action movie.
Yeah, it's an action movie.
Holiday movie.
It's like Ninja Nun, right? Yeah. Combat Chaplain, right?
Papa Bear. Let's get to work on the Combat Chaplains. Combat Chaplain. Anyway, I'm an idiot. Sam, why don't you bring us some audience polls?
Let's do it. I love it.
All right. These are a sharp left turn to everything we've talked about so far.
Wait. But this is great. I know because Sam, wait. Let me real quick, Sam, before you get in there. I just got to let Rich know, like, it might be a sharp left turn, but it's because it's Sam. And Sam is, when he looks at our guests and what our guests do, it's about the breadth of the journey. So sharp left turn, but totally spot on because Sam's breadth of knowledge of the industry and what our guests do. So, all right, I'll leave it to you, Sam.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Nick. I appreciate it.
You guys need to get a room.
It's a love fest, man. Come on now.
With each other.
Go for it.
Share your poll.
No. We're good. Sam.
Okay, so these still should, hit for you, Rich. They should still make sense. But the first one, they're kind of tied together a little bit here. And this first one is actually something I like to talk about a lot and something I've thought about a lot, especially recently. But it's a simple question. Do teen movies still exist? So movies aimed at teenagers. And the results are pretty interesting. With 53%, no, they're extinct. So they don't exist anymore.
Wow, 53%.
And second place is yes, but not like they used to, with 34%. And then with just 13%, yes, and they're thriving. So the audience is pretty much in agreement that at the very least they aren't, what they used to be.
Okay, real quick.
What was the wait? What was the percentage of what it used to be? What was the percentage of what it used to be?
34%.
34%. Yeah.
Right. So I got to give some backstory, right? So one of you could do it. Either Sam could do it or Rich could do it. Why would you bring this poll up for Rich when we're sitting here talking about combat chaplains? We're talking about Octopus Eye. We're talking about documentaries. Why would a teen movie poll be relevant to Rich?
Rich?
Oh, okay.
After that, Sam. Okay. Look, I started my career as a film producer making teenage movies. So one of the first movies I made was the high school movie She's All That, and then I made a bunch of others after that. And as these things go in Hollywood, when kind of your first big movie really opens as the number one movie and gets a lot of attention, sort of becomes, it's still one of the top 10 teenage movies ever made in film history. Everyone in town says, oh, cool, that's what you know how to do. So that's what you're going to do for the rest of your life, is you're going to make teenage movies. Yeah. And so it's great. It's a great problem to have. It pays the bills. There's also only so many versions of that you can make before you want to start to pull your hair out. And ultimately, I feel like I made every version of that one could possibly make. But I love those movies because I grew up, and now, of course, I'm dating myself, but I grew up watching all the John Hughes movies, which are like 16 Candles, Some Kind of Wonderful, Pretty in Pink, Ferris Bueller. Like, those were the movies of my teenage years. Yep. And they were like the soundtrack to my teenage years. And so, Hollywood did what Hollywood does, which is they made too many of them. They burned out the genre. It had kind of been dead for, a decade or so. When I showed up in town, I thought, well, those are the movies that I want to make. And yeah, I love action movies. I love documentaries. I love sports movies. but these are the movies I wanted to make. And I think She's All That kind of reignited that genre. And then you had a whole bunch of other movies, mine and other people's, coming out after that.
Yeah.
And I love that, because what I love about high school movies is that they're universal. Everybody has the same high school experience
Right.
where you feel like a fish out of water. It sucks. You're trying to figure yourself out. Like, even the popular kid thinks he's like ugly and stupid. And so when you go to college, everybody has a very different experience. Some people don't go to college at all. Some people go to, the Ivy League experience is different than the community college experience. So everybody's college experience, if they even have one, it's very different. It's hard to be universally accessible, but everybody has the same exact high school experience. And
That's a good point.
I love telling those stories. And part of me misses telling those stories, and part of me feels like I said everything I needed to say in the 10 high school movies I made, or however many it was. So I think that's the setup for you, Sam. And now, I guess, in terms of, my thoughts on that.
Yeah, do you agree with the results?
Yeah, look, I think it's probably number 2, which is that they still exist, but in a very different way.
I agree.
And
I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say one of the ways, though, that they are different is that they it's less about teenage movies and more about episodic for teenagers. Like you think of a show like Riverdale or something. Like
Euphoria.
Yeah, Euphoria is a good example.
Euphoria is not for teenagers, man.
Well, okay,
Stop watching
but
Euphoria, Sam.
Oh, I stopped a while ago. Yeah, no.
But there's plenty of others beyond Euphoria or not to Euphoria. But I think that it's so different. And part of the challenge is that we live in such a different world. And, I've had the opportunity to remake stuff. I've had the opportunity to go in and make another teenage movie. And, I'm probably getting a little old for it anyway, but I love them as a genre, much to the chagrin of my wife, who is someone who loves nerd movies and TV shows. And, I'm not a Game of Thrones guy. I was back in the early days when they had far more nudity, but I guess these days I'm like,
they clean it up too much.
They clean it up, and I'm like, it's not for me. But, I'm always making her watch a teenage movie or a teenage show or something. And so I do think that the episodic kind of format has become where teenage stories get told. But I think the world we live in is so different. There used to be something really communal about going to a movie theater on a Friday night with a bunch of your teenage friends in high school. It was freedom. You got to even if you couldn't drive, you still got to go walk around the mall, and you got to see people and you got to hang out. And it was just such a part of the fabric of being a teenager at the time. And then it became the water cooler talk too. Oh, let's go the next day and get on the phone and talk with our friends about what we saw, or go to school and talk about what we saw. And that's how movies caught fire back then. Today, the world is different. Have you ever seen a teenager that's not glued to their phone? So just things are different, and you can get so much a different type of gratification on social media and so forth, that it's just made teenage movies a very different animal. You don't need the movies as much as you once did to really, tell the stories of your high school experience. You do that every day. You become the entertainment. I wrote this book with some other people years ago called Dancing with Digital Natives. And it was really about how life as a teenager has changed. And we won a bunch of awards for it. It was really cool. And so, my premise on that, on my part of the book, was digital natives don't go for entertainment because they now are the entertainment. So it was I've got a phone in my pocket. That phone's got a camera. I might as well just film myself saying stuff, and I'm going to put that on social media, and it's going to be instant gratification. I get to tell my own story. So they don't need to hear other people's stories in the same way. But when you do find one that's really awesome, I still love it. I mean, I just love it. There's something incredibly universal about everyone's high school experience. And I have little kids, so I'm not at the point of being a dad of high schoolers, luckily, because I have 2 girls, which is the universe's way of getting me back for 20 years of dating in LA. And I'm dreading having to have high school girl drama, but I love being a girl dad. So I love these movies. And whenever I can find one of those high school movies now, I still watch it. I make my wife watch it because I just love it when they're really well done. But they're entirely different. as a function of the world we live in.
It's almost
Rich,
it's almost you have the same story,
Chris.
Nick, but they put it in a fantasy world.
Yeah, well, that's interesting that you mentioned that, because my comment was going to be, so I really liked what Rich said about Universal.
Me too.
And I feel like that's the difference. That's the 34%. They exist, but they're not universal. And the reason I think they're not universal is what in my head I'm starting to call the Friends effect. So if you ever watch the show Friends and you start from the beginning, you look at the characters. All these characters are subtly individual because they're all this group of friends that hangs out. They have common interests, right? But they're subtly individual. As you watch the show go on, they become terribly individual. And what I mean by that is that they become caricatures of their original selves. So now they're extra stupid, right? They're extra lazy. They're extra neurotic, right? They're extra everything. And I feel like that's what's happened with media. And it might have been because of what you're saying, Rich, as well, which is everyone has the middle in their pocket. So what comes out in the theater and what comes out in these TV shows is extra on both ends. So what I liked about we're calling them old school, but the films that we grew up on is that they had a lot of that angst in them and didn't feel as sugar coated,
especially the John Hughes,
right? Yeah. Exactly. Like you got some sugar because you needed that because a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down, but it was a spoonful. Now we're getting either super sugary, which is something like a High School Musical, or we're getting super angsty like a Euphoria. Those two things live on two different ends of the spectrum, and therefore they are not universal. So they exist, but they're not for everybody. So if you're looking for the middle, that's the part that I think we need again. Same thing with combat chaplains, right? That is the thing that brings the left and the right together. That's what we need. Yeah, that's what we need. We need that middle ground of universality, of common ground, of it's real, but a spoonful, not a bowl full of sugar.
Really, really well said. So I think we have a consensus here. We're somewhere in the middle. They exist, but they ain't the same. Sam, give us what you used to be, or give us our next poll.
Just on that, I mean, I can point to a couple in the last few years that were great. I mean, last year, I don't know if you guys have seen it. There was a great film called Bottoms.
I didn't see Bottoms. I didn't get to see that.
I thought it was great.
It was my favorite movie of the year last year.
Oh, wow.
It was one of mine for sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
Chris, we got to get on it.
Write it down. I can't believe I didn't see it.
Very good.
I can't believe I didn't see it.
And then a little bit back, I think it's 2019, Booksmart.
Yep,
was Olivia Wilde. That's a great one.
Yep, that was great too. Yeah, I love that one.
They're still kicking. They're still around.
34%.
Yep, 34%.
Yep.
I think they can make a return for sure.
But they come and go. Like that's part of the problem with streaming. And I love streaming. I'm a guy that started a streaming service. But the challenge with streaming is there's so much content there that nothing ever gets a chance to sort of like take a hold and stay there for a while. You're just on to the next one. And so it's very almost transactional. So, I remember watching those, right? Yeah. And it's like, I remember watching those movies, Booksmart and Bottoms, and like, I wanted to like go to work the next day and talk about them. And like, like nobody wanted to. And and everybody that I work with, like, watch something different the night before. So they all want to talk about different stuff, and it's just like, it's hard for something to become part of the zeitgeist when content is so fragmented these days. And streaming enables that, which is great on a certain level, but it's also less desirable on another level because you get a movie like what Sam's talking about, like Bottoms, and you guys had never heard of that movie until just now. And so, I like it. I know it because I'm a teenage movie guy. But it's hard for a movie like that to really become part of the conversation when there's just so much other stuff out there. You know what I mean? And I think that's part of the challenge.
I think right now, I would say Outer Banks has the attention and the minds and hearts of teenagers right now, but they dump the whole season on you. So there's no lasting in the zeitgeist. They binge the whole season gets binged in a night or two. literally a night or two. I'm like, where do you find the time? Well, it's there. It's on autoplay.
There's no binging in this house, Chris. There's no binging in this house. I tell my son.
I don't believe in binging.
Yeah, I tell my son we're not doing it. Every time their new series comes out that we watch together, Dad, we got to watch the next episode. And I tell him, I try to, bring that Saturday Night Live voice back and be like, not gonna do it. Yeah. Wouldn't be prudent.
yeah. So things had a longer shelf life. They had a longer half life when you had to sort of wait, and it was appointment viewing. Yeah. And I think that's to Rich's point as well. All right, Sam, give us the next poll, please.
So this is perfect. You guys teed this one up perfectly. But the next poll is, what John Hughes movie is the best?
Okay.
So,
totally unfair question.
wait. Let's ask Rich. Let's ask Rich what he thinks is the number one.
What do you think?
Without the options. Without the options.
It's the one you'd think.
Well, okay.
No. Not the one that the audience. Well, give him two, right? Okay, Rich. Which one did you think the audience said, and then which one would you have said?
16 Candles and 16 Candles.
Okay. Sam, hit him up.
All right.
Number one is Home Alone. It is Home Alone at number one, 67%.
Interesting. Wow.
I thought that was... I didn't know he did Home Alone, actually, to be honest with you. I had no idea of that. So it would caught me off guard when I made the poll, and
right.
caught me off guard again when I saw the results. Number two is The Breakfast Club with 15%.
Okay, I thought that would be higher.
Then Ferris Bueller's Day Off at 13%. And then I got a little biased because this is my favorite, but in dead last was Planes, Trains, and Automobiles at 4%. So
he didn't include
16. I didn't include 16 Candles. Admittedly, I did not. I subbed in my favorite.
Should have had a other.
Yeah, how can you have fault with all the movies that Sam just named? Like, they're all epic and fantastic, and and Breakfast Club. I mean, come on, man.
Right.
And, I don't know if you saw the documentary that came out a couple months ago where they went to kind of revisit all the people from it was St. Elmo's Fire. That's what it was. The one where they went to revisit all the people from St. Elmo's Fire. So same vintage. I was thinking about it because of Emilio Estevez, who was in St. Elmo's Fire, and then obviously Breakfast Club, which and Emilio and I made a movie a few years ago called The Public, which was about some homeless guys that took over a public library on a really cold night. And then Alec Baldwin is the cop with a heart of gold that comes in and has to figure it all out. And it was a great movie. And Emilio is a great director and a great storyteller. But he and I have been friends for years. But it's a friendship that I cherish because he's a great guy and we're good pals. But also because of The Breakfast Club. I mean, that was such an amazing movie, and
it is, yeah.
It's just so great. And I just saw it not too long ago, actually, and it really holds up. I thought it was great. I think it's still awesome.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite movies, and I would say the weed scene is kind of hilarious. Maybe a little hokey, but it still fits. It still works. It's really wonderful. Now, my favorite on that list, Sam, is Ferris Bueller's Day Off, because that was it was like a. I don't know. It was my 16 Candles for Rich's 16 Candles. For me, it was Ferris Bueller, but I loved all the movies. And I think I just watched Ferris at a time when I was entering my teen years, and it was like a revolution to me. It was like all the things I was seeing, the possibilities that were at play for how I could be how I could achieve true truancy, and do it in just the smoothest, coolest way possible. Like it was really motivational for me. So I even show my kids Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and I still watch it whenever it's on or whenever I can find it. So anyway, I would say I'm with the 13% there, but I'm not mad at Home Alone, just based on its overall, if I'm being honest, Home Alone has a global audience, right?
Yeah. And an all ages one too.
It's a 4-quadrant movie, man. It's not just a teenage movie.
Not at all. It's a big one. And then we have sort of that subconscious, thing, that marketing thing happening sort of below the surface where Kieran Culkin is having a moment now. And so we're just always reminded, oh, the Culkins.
Well, literally every Christmas, it's
and every Christmas, it's the Mariah
TV,
Carey
ads.
of movies.
Exactly.
It is.
Right.
It is.
Which, let me just say, so Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is my personal favorite. And that's for one reason. It's the Thanksgiving movie.
Yeah.
It's like the only Thanksgiving movie. It was the first R-rated movie I ever saw, and I watched it on Thanksgiving. So it's ingrained in me to have that one at number one, even though it's unpopular.
Hey, Soul Food Nick.
And it's got one of the best movie quotes of all time, which is when they're laying in bed and Steve Martin says, "Where's your hand?" And he's like, I don't know. Well, I mean, it's between these two pillows.
Between two pillows.
Those aren't pillows.
Yeah. And there's hey guy, but I want to tell you, like, between Ferris Bueller and Home Alone, the main character, the protagonist, intelligence, ingenuity, and psychological manipulation.
It's a great point. Yeah, Matthew Broderick and Macaulay Culkin are the same character, just in different ages, different contexts.
And it's great that if you watch it, these are geniuses. Yeah, in many different ways. Again, ingenuity, the way they were able to use their surroundings, use things around them, or think on the fly. Then you have the other part. They're just intelligent to come up with these schemes to begin with, and then the way that they manipulate either the parents or the teachers, right, or the burglars. The way they're able to manipulate them to get them to what they need to do. It's genius. It's this little thing that kind of sits in both of these movies.
Both require somewhat dim-witted parents, which is also the genius of John Hughes, because he knows who's watching the movie, right? So
that's right.
We're seeing through the kids' eyes what parents look like.
It's like when the Muppet Babies had the nanny, and then what did you hear? Like when she talked, or was it the nanny? Yeah,
Charlie Brown.
Charlie Brown. That was Charlie Brown.
Shopify is a global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business and sell more with less effort thanks to the Shopify Magic, your AI-powered all-star. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/redcircle, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/redcircle now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/redcircle.
It is Ryan here, and I have a question for you. What do you do when you win? Like, are you a fist pumper, a woohooer, a hand clapper, a high fiver? If you want to hone in on those winning moves, check out Chumba Casino. Choose from hundreds of social casino style games for your chance to redeem serious cash prizes. There are new game releases weekly, plus free daily bonuses. So don't wait. Start having the most fun ever at ChumbaCasino.com.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
So Charlie Brown, the parents were always just going, wah, 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 wah.
I try to play Charlie Brown on Thanksgiving for my youngest daughter who's 15. And she's like, I hate Charles Brown. Don't play Charles Brown. I'm like, he's a classic. He shows up for a reason. You need to embrace this. Anyway, Sam, thank you so much for dropping the polls on us. Papa Bear, can you bring us some things we should know?
I think I can.
All right.
Now, I may have
Here we go.
I may have to bring a correction to something that Rich said earlier.
Oh, no. Ooh, fact checker.
Yeah. Well, so I'm going.
You love doing this. Don't pretend like you don't love it.
I'm going to go back to combat chaplains.
Mm-hmm.
And
wait, the number of combat chaplains that died, is that what you're going to correct them on?
No.
Is it like 413 and not 412?
Well,
I saw him look when he said that. I was like, oh, come on, PB.
I'm going to go back and correct the question of whether this was the first time Hollywood worked with the Army.
Okay.
So
to be clear, I said Army Chaplain
Chaplains,
not Army. And there's a difference. So the US Army is like big Army, and then the Army Chaplain Corps is kind of its own.
So
very key distinction.
Yeah, they don't throw these chaplains out there, without some training. So there is a Army Chaplain Corps Training School. And so this question has a little bit of a preamble. The first session of the U.S. Army Chaplain School was in March of 1918 at Fort Monroe, Virginia. The training school moved 5 more times between World War I and World War II, when it was moved to a university where the number of students increased from 75 to 450. While located there, the Army made an instructional film for the school in Hollywood titled For God and Country, which portrayed 4 chaplains being trained at the school. My question is, during this time, at what university was the U.S. Army Chaplain School located, and what actor played the part of the Catholic chaplain?
Whew. Okay, I can answer half of that.
Okay.
But I'll let someone see if they can answer.
That's very impressive, Rich, that you can even answer half of that.
That's great.
Okay.
UNC Chapel Hill.
Okay, that's your guess, UNC Chapel Hill. Wow, okay. PB, what year was For God and Country made again, please?
1942 or 3. Let's see.
So it was made towards the end of World War II.
Well, it was at this university between 42 and 45.
Okay, between 42 and 45.
The film came in the early part of that.
Nick is guessing UNC Chapel Hill. And I'm going to guess West Point. So Army University, West Point. And the actor is none other.
Right.
This is so stupid. I'm going to say,
guess. Just do it.
Clark Gable. There's couldn't be a more wrong answer, I'm sure. Okay, Nick, do you have an actor name?
I'm stuck on the time frame. I can't think of an actor. I might have to throw my
Fetchit.
You're right. I'm gonna have to throw my guess to Sam. Sam, you got anything on this
Sam,
one?
what do you
got? I don't have the actor on this one.
Sam's like, what is 1918?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm stuck.
Rich, what do you? Can you answer this?
He's got half of it. Let's go for half of it, Rich.
I've got half of it, so I don't know the university. I will say, in Papa Bear's defense, that the chaplains were started by George Washington. So we've had a long time, and even if there is just one prior collaboration, that's still pretty thin. But I'm going to say that the actor is none other than Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan.
Wow. 80s, 40.
42.
Okay.
All right, PB.
What do you got?
What's the answer?
The actor was Ronald Reagan.
Ding, 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 ding.
Catholic chaplain.
Bang, biscuit. That is incredible.
Rich wasn't guessing. He said, I know half of his answer.
He was super confident. He's like, I got it.
Well, I'll tell you how I know that. We used some stock footage in the Fighting Spirit Combat Chaplain's Journey film. And it was just, we just needed old school footage of chaplains going to chaplain school. And so we just found it and we threw it in. And the editor and I were watching it one day, and she's like, that guy looks so familiar. Who is that guy? And we spent, I don't know how much technology we used to zoom in this grainy footage and find Ronald Reagan in a crowd of people being, at the chaplain school. Wow. And so if you watch the film, it's a little Easter egg in the film. If you watch the film, it's in there, and we don't highlight it and we don't point it out, and there's no arrow at his head like Ronald Reagan, the president. But if you know it's in there, you'll see it now.
That's cool, man.
That's remarkable. Just the idea that Ronald Reagan was acting at the time that Ayn Rand was trying to write screenplays blows my mind. Papa Bear, the university.
I think it's equally surprising that with the film being made in Hollywood, what university the school was at.
Okay.
The answer is
UCLA.
So you're walking us down the slippery slope here.
Yeah, it's nowhere close. It was at Harvard in Massachusetts, Cambridge.
Of course. Harvard. So I was closest by proximity, right? Like by.
Well,
Nick's guessed in North Carolina, Kakalaki.
But yes,
I know we're close to Harvard.
You understand, but you see why I picked it.
I did. It was actually smart. It had a logical. I saw your synapses connecting.
Exactly.
But the school was at Harvard during those years. It moved again. It's moved a total of 16 times, and it's now in South Carolina. So. Where there is a museum, combat chaplain museum.
Is it always moving, Papa Bear, due to the increase in enrollment? Is that why it's always
part
moving?
of it was that, and part of it was where there were facilities and room for it, and depending on the number of people. Obviously, during World War II, they needed more chaplains. And just moving it to Harvard, like you saw in the preamble, moved it up to 450 people. It actually shut down some after World War I for a period of time, and then started back up in 1920. But it's been moving around. It's
according to the research.
It's in It's in
moved 16 times.
Fort Jackson.
It's in Fort Jackson, right now,
South Carolina. Yeah.
Fort Jackson, South Carolina.
Yeah.
All around the world, this thing is gone. That is Papa Bear. Guess what?
What?
You did it again. That is a thing we should know. And you just gave us yet another icebreaker at a cocktail party in which we know no one.
That's right.
Yes, we can find a way, we can wiggle our way in with this little gem of information, and it's perfectly aligned with our guest today. So good job, Papa Bear.
All right.
Yep, well done.
Thank you.
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Hey guys, I don't know if you remember, but in 2022, we had the pleasure of having a few conversations with the late Dr. Mark Goulston. Now, he's just an amazing guy with awesome stories, medical doctor and psychiatrist. He was so amazing and insightful, and he offered such great advice for the creative community. Well, there's one piece of advice that still sticks with me to this day. He said, one of the reasons you're creative is you can connect dots from the air and turn them into your creations. You may not even know where they come from, but you can connect dots like the way blobs of mercury connect to each other. It's an amazing feeling, but when you're on the down curve, what a lot of creatives think is the dots aren't connecting and they may never connect again. I've been on a fool's errand thinking that this would work, that I could do this. All the naysayers who've been telling me, why don't you just get a job? Well, maybe they're right. That feeling of utter humiliation and feeling alone is devastating. That's the time when you least want to reach out to people. But that's the time when you need to reach out to people. If you need help and don't know where to turn, consider BetterHelp. As an online platform, it's designed to be convenient, flexible, and completely suited to your schedule. To get started, you'll complete a brief questionnaire to match you with a therapist. The next steps are yours to take, and if you need to change therapists, you can do so with no cost. So, if it's your time to reach out to someone for help, let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/makeit today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/makeit. All one word. Chris, you gotta stop for a second, man.
Okay.
Check it. I just gotta stop this for a second and just gotta say that I just wanted to honor one of the parts of our credo. Okay. Now I know that our whole show does this, but right now I wanted to honor the Be better part of our credo.
Okay.
Is that cool? Can we do this real quick?
Let's do it. Yeah.
Okay. So I think that new filmmakers are always dealing with some sort of existential crisis. Is that fair?
Those are the worst kind of crises.
Crises. So the crisis that I'm thinking about right now is this idea. Okay. I'm going to read this a little bit. It says, how do I get hired without having experience? And how do I get experience without getting hired? Like that is the conversation all the time, it seems, especially when you go to like film festivals, you're in panels. That is what the conversation always is. So how do we address that?
Well, there's a few ways to address it. And it goes beyond film. There's a lot of people that have this existential crisis. But if you are a filmmaker, you can fix this in one way that just comes right to the top of my mind. And it's the Film Crew Technology Program at Columbia State Community College on the Franklin, Tennessee campus. Now, I've been to this campus. This campus is not like a normal community college. This is like beautiful and sprawling and everything is brand new. They do a great job there, but they provide the experience, the training, the knowledge to allow you to just step right into the entertainment workforce and continue in higher education or both even. So you can go there for some other major and still be part of the Film Crew Technology Program, or you can just go there and do film. So the technology certificate allows you to work in the industry while you're getting your degree. So that means they do job placement while you're still in school. So that's huge. So that answers part of that question at least, right?
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Like that's exactly the type of stuff that I think our people need. So you said a lot. Like I know that school's, it sounds awesome. I'm like, hey, I could go hang out there, but let's get to the specifics. So like what kind of training do they provide there?
Well, first of all, this is some below the line stuff that you're learning to do so you can be placed. And look, I'll just tell you, as a producer, as producers, we know that not being ready on set, which has a lot to do with your training, your skill set, your speed, actually, tear down, put back up, company moves. That is so important where you went to school to learn how to do that. Are you effective right away? Can we count on you? And so here's some of the training: safety and etiquette training, pre-production training, production training, post-production training, delivery. And so they really train at Columbia State University Community College from pre to post film crew technology. They train below the line workers. These are your gaffers, your grips, your best boys, all that stuff, your lighting, your wiring, you name it. They really train them in the tools of their trade. So here's some of the equipment they have. Now, this is the thing that makes this so legit.
People get excited about this stuff, man. Like this is where people really get excited. It's like, I can get the training, but what you got? What are we using? What are we playing with?
Well, yeah, I've been in their cinema world and they have a lot of stuff. So they have an Arri Alexa 35 and it's loaded to a 3-ton grip truck, for example. They have sound recording to pre and post-production computer lab, film crew delivery, hands-on experience. So there's a ton of training there and you're training with state-of-the-art equipment.
Dude, that's awesome. I mean, that's exactly the kind of experience that people would want. But, I got to ask that other question. I know I'm dropping questions on you because I know you got the knowledge.
There's a lot of questions.
There's a lot of questions. I'm just saying, existential crisis, brother. So the next question is, they got any financial aid or scholarships for my people out there, man? It's always, every little bit helps. That's all I got to say.
So you're poor.
No, look, people just need a hand from time to time.
No, I'm kidding. I've used financial aid.
That's
Shout
right.
out to Pell Grants. And by the way, Columbia State Community College does come with some financial aid and some help. So here's the deal. Columbia State Community College is accredited by the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools. And in addition, financial aid is available for those who qualify. So you're in good shape, Nick. You're good to go. You qualify for this. It includes the TN Promise and TN Reconnect programs. So again, this is a campus in Tennessee. It's sprawling. It's beautiful. You don't have to live here to go there. We just want to let everybody know. Enrollment begins each fall semester Space is limited. Now, this is the key.
I was gonna ask,
you want that experience. You want that experience. You're having this existential crisis, but you have to act fast. You got to do something for yourself too. And that is what the film industry is all about. It's about putting your head down, going to work, doing something for yourself. So don't wait. There's 20 students each year. They only take in 20. So you need to apply right now. So for more information, you can reach out to friend of the podcast and our friend as well in our personal lives, David Smith. He's the FCT program director. That's the Film Crew Tech program director. You can call him. What a bold man. He is going to let you call him. 615-790-4410. Again, reach out to David Smith, the FCT program director, 615-790-4410. You can email him if I know the young folks today, Nick, they don't call anybody. They don't talk on the phone.
Folks today.
All right, so let's get an email address going.
Yeah.
david.smith@columbiastate.edu. Columbia spelled COLUMBIA state.edu. And if you just want to, if you're already convinced, if me and Nick have already sold you, just go straight to the website, www.columbiastate.edu/FCT. Again, that's www.columbiastate.edu/FCT. And when you get there, click on Film Crew Application. Remember, slots are limited. There's only 20 spots. Go do that right now. www.columbiastate.edu/FCT. And now, back to the show. Nick, you want to go into like a little speed round, a little speed bag in honor of maybe Tyson versus Paul on
and I like how you did
Friday.
That little speed bag.
Little speed bag questions.
I don't think there's going to be
Rich.
any speed bag between Tyson and Paul. But no. Rich, I just got a couple.
They're both looking quite beefy.
Yeah. I won't even get into that, man. That's a train wreck. But anyway, so Rich, I've got a couple. It's 4 questions for you. Just we can rapid fire. We can take as long as you want. But these are basically that Q&A. Some questions that I think that the filmmaking audience would like to answer for themselves. So out there doing searches, they're wanting to answer some questions about their filmmaking journey. So the first one is, how do you find financial support for documentaries?
Man, that's hard. How do you find financial support for any movie or TV show?
Right.
Well, for this one, I sit on the board of a company called Paulus Productions. They were the ones that had the original idea to make this film.
Okay.
The guy that runs it is named Mike Sullivan, and he is a longtime television guy. He was one of the producers of the show Growing Pains back in the 80s. And
classic.
He
Love Growing Pains.
Yeah, it's great, man. And he ran the UPN network. He was the first ever president of the UPN network, which is kind of the precursor to some of the different versions of that network that have existed since then. Yeah. And great guy, had this idea to make a combat chaplain film. And Paulus Productions is a nonprofit production company. It was started 60 years ago by a Catholic priest. And they make just positive, feel-good human stories. It's not a religious thing at all. It's just... they, as they say, they advance the conversation between the sacred and the secular, and which is so they this is not a group of people that go out and try to like preach to the converted or make real faith-based stuff. They really like to make stuff that appeals to big mainstream audiences and just tell positive human stories. And so they were the ones that wrote the original check for it, and then ultimately the Army Chaplain Corps came in. And they stepped up, and they also wrote a check, and we're incredibly grateful for it. And so that's how this one happened. Others have happened in different ways. I mean, Matthew McConaughey and I made a documentary about a guy named Darryl Royal, who was the football coach at the University of Texas when we were kids growing up in Texas. And, I pieced that together. 10 grand here, 25 grand there, just, sitting on people's living room couches. That's crazy. The one that Halle Berry and I made about black soldiers, that one came from a whole different bunch of sources because, by definition, documentaries always run out of money. Mm-hmm. And so the filmmaker, Frank Martin, had gotten like half the money. and then I got the other half, and then the movie ran out of money, and then Frank went and put a mortgage on his house, a second mortgage on his house.
Wow.
From US Bank and Trust. And then that ran out of money again. And then we went and got corporate sponsorships, and we ended up getting a big corporate sponsorship from US Bank and Trust. So Frank took that sponsorship, turned around and paid off
his mortgage.
Mortgage with US Bank and Trust. And so you just never know. But the one thing that was really cool about that documentary was we ultimately premiered it on PBS. It's a multi-part kind of thing, like a Ken Burns type film. Mm-hmm. And so we premiered it in consecutive nights over multiple nights on PBS. And because PBS is in every home in America, it's one of the few places that if you can get on there, they pay you nothing, but because it's got such great distribution, you can get corporate sponsorships. Yeah. And so, and a lot of it's not like you can have a corporate sponsorship with a show at Netflix or, on NBC. Like you can only do it on PBS. And so that turned out to be like a really great model, which is not super intuitive, but it's doable. And so I think it's a great path for documentary filmmakers to finance stuff. But the flip side is, in some respects, you can shoot stuff with your iPhone for no money today, and you don't need that money. I had dinner the other night with a friend named Nate Boyer, who is making a documentary about D-Day, and he just financed it out of his own pocket with a handful of friends that kicked him a few bucks here and a few bucks there. And Nate's a super interesting guy. Nate is a former Green Beret, Army guy, Special Forces, did a couple tours in Afghanistan, taught himself to play football, had never played football, not a down of football, taught himself how to play football on YouTube because he was bored in Afghanistan. Got out of the Army, had seen people wearing University of Texas Longhorn logos and was like, oh, that looks kind of cool. Maybe I'll go there and play football. And people are like, that's the University of Texas.
You're right. Like, dude, isn't that, you don't just go there.
Their whole life to do this. Yeah. And he walked on the team, having taught himself to be a long snapper on YouTube, made the team, played 4 years, got put on scholarship.
Unbelievable.
Did this at age 33, by the way, and then became the oldest rookie in NFL history for the Seattle Seahawks. Like, he's just one of those guys. Like, he just figures out how to make stuff happen. And so he's making this, D-Day documentary because there's a handful of people left that were actually at D-Day, and they're somewhere between 98 and 105 years old. So he just took his iPhone and went and started filming interviews with them. He tracked them down online and talked to their kids and went and started just asking them questions, sort of like what you were talking about, Nick. I just want to memorialize these war stories so that they will be there forever. And so sometimes you don't even need that much money.
It's amazing. Sam, let's get on an expose for Nate Boyer, please. Let's Google him up. Let's start piecing together some stuff with Nate. That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
All right. So what's great about that is that dovetails into one of my other questions, which is about marketing. So what are the best ways to promote a documentary film based off the fact that two things. So one I already knew, which is documentary films don't have a big budget, right? These aren't studio films. You're not getting hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to promote it. And then the second thing, what you just mentioned, you keep running out of money. So if you run out of money and you don't have that much to begin with, how do you promote these things? I know you've shared some things that you've kind of had aha moments with. Like you just talked about, PBS is a great way to promote, but also potentially finance. And I think that going to the theatrical route and inviting audiences in for free was something that you happened upon. Do you have anything else like that where you're just like, no, this is the best way to do it under the circumstances?
Well, I've only made 3 documentaries. I think of the 28 movies I made, only 3 are docs, so I may not be the best guy for this question. But there is a theme of the 3 that I made, which is that there's a big celebrity involved. And so, Matthew McConaughey was in the Darryl Royal film, Halle Berry was in the Black Soldiers film, Chris Pratt is in this one, and that was a whole sort of experience to go get Chris, my producing partner, Daniel Snyder. and I have both worked in the business a long time, kind of know how to navigate the halls of Hollywood. And Daniel had been a young kid at UTA, United Talent Agency, which represents Chris. And like there's all these different ways that you get into, the orbit of a celebrity. But for me, that's always been the thing that elevates the film above kind of the clutter of all the other documentaries that get made. And so I think that's a real marketing benefit that is a great thing. Not everybody's got access to the biggest movie stars in the world, but there are people that you can put into your project, whether it's big, medium, or small, that have a higher profile and a bigger voice than you do. And using those people to spread the word is a free marketing machine. Free.
It's basically growth. It's basically growth hack marketing, growth hacker marketing. Yeah,
it really is. And look, there's just so much stuff. When we were talking about this earlier, so much stuff is being made. You need a way to rise above the clutter. Big studios don't buy documentary films. They don't release documentary films. You're never going to get, a superhero movie marketing budget of $200 million. I might argue that Fighting Spirit: A Combat Chaplain's Journey is a superhero movie. We just didn't have the superhero movie marketing budget. Mm-hmm. And so we had to go and we had to use Chris. We had to use other celebrities. We had to use influencers. We had 100 influencers, and we tracked these people down and basically, begged them, showed them an early cut of the movie so they got to see it before their friends, begged them to, if they liked the movie, to post about it. They did. All of them did. 100% of them did. That was pretty cool. Yeah. And, you got to find alternative ways to do it. And, especially, even in the theatrical space, there's only been 50 documentaries released theatrically this year. The documentary market theatrically has never rebounded since the pandemic. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of like we asked ourselves this question. Okay, cool. People are going to movie theaters to see superhero movies, family animated movies, maybe a horror movie every now and then, and that's it. They are absolutely not going to see documentaries. So how do we get them into the theaters? Because we wanted to check these boxes. We wanted the communal experience for military families. We wanted this, common ground experience for people right after the presidential election. I'm, an Oscar voter and a Motion Picture Academy member. I love movies in theaters. I'm motivated to, really support that as a format. So we thought, if people are not organically going to the theaters, what are we going to do? So we came up with all these very unique marketing approaches to get the word out. And then we really tried to focus it all on Veterans Day across the country, because that was a great tie-in. And, and then we created a lot of noise in the market by giving away free tickets. I did 60 different interviews, and other people involved in the film did another 60. You just got to work it. Yep. So, because we didn't have the budget. I've had studio movie budgets before, and they're awesome. They just tell you where to show up, and it's fantastic. But this is a different beast. But if you love it, this is not a movie I did for a paycheck. I did it because I was passionate about it. It was a labor of love, and I'm really proud of it. And so if you're really proud of something like that, you'll just find ways to do it. But you got to be clever. You can't just keep doing the same old stuff. The world's changing. You have to be one step ahead. And I think we did that on this film.
That's really key. That's really key what you just said. You said two really powerful things there. One, if you love it, you have to go and pursue it. And the mistake that I've seen a lot of independent film producers make is that they're hustling to get to hand the movie off to someone else who's going to do the things you just said that you did. They're really hustling really hard to find someone else to take the reins. Please take this off my hands so that maybe you'll do the marketing, you'll do the promotion. And then when they don't do it, you have this sort of baked in excuse of, well, they said they were going to do it and they didn't do it, and that's why the film didn't do what it was supposed to do. I think the other thing too is you love it because you love it because you are proud of it. What makes you proud of it? You're proud of it because the subject matter and the quality. And I think what happens with a lot of independent filmmakers is somewhere really deep down at that soul level you talked about a couple of times in this conversation, Rich, they know they didn't make the best movie. They know they didn't do as well as they could have done, and they're a little afraid to get that level of exposure, or somewhere deep down they don't believe it deserves that level of exposure, and therefore they don't press it as hard as they should. The best way I think about it in my own life is I remember getting a piano, because I play piano for the house, and I had a friend come up to me and say, "Wow, you got a piano in your house. Do you feel like, how do you feel? Isn't that amazing?" And I just said, it's not the piano, it's the music that you can make with the piano. So there's the body, and then there's the soul, right? And so somewhere you got to find the soul in your film, and that's what drives you to find the influencers, to give away the tickets, to find the cool ways to do different things. Anyway, off my soapbox.
Yeah, that was great, Rich.
But that's true. I mean, and you see the same thing throughout Hollywood, whether it be actors, writers, producers, directors, who have agents, and they're always like, "Oh, my agent's not doing anything." I run into people all the time, some of whom are big, giant movie stars, who are like, "Oh, my agent's not doing anything," and you're like, "Okay, I get that."
Yeah,
because it's your agent's job to go out and get you opportunities, not jobs. Opportunities, and there's a difference. And as my mentor, one of many mentors, Daryl Royal, said, is luck is when preparation meets opportunity. So like the agent can get you in the door, they can't usually get you the job. But the reality of it is the agent takes 10%. So if you think about it that way,
if he or she is fair,
well, the agent should be doing 10% of the work.
Right. Yeah.
Right. There you go. That's perfect.
90%. And so you should be doing 90% of the work. And so I think a lot of people forget that.
That's a great point.
And you just got to realize, like, nobody's going to give it to you. You got to just show up and take it, man.
That's great. And I was going to say, so one of my other questions was about the celebrity part. You kind of gave a segue to that, but you also kind of informed me a little bit along the way, which is you've been doing this for a while. You understand how to navigate the industry, and you can't give that to an independent filmmaker in our audience in a minute, right? So knowing that the independent filmmaking audience doesn't have that experience that you have, they don't have the connections that you have, how do they attach the right people to their projects? So I was going to actually going to say celebrity. So I'm not going to say that now. I'm going to say the right people to their projects to give them a platform. How do they go about finding those people?
I think it's an exercise in networking, but everybody's got access to somebody, and you got to just work whoever's in your ecosystem. And it's all relative. I mean, it's not that I'm connected. It's that I've spent 30 years in this business, and, I know how to navigate. I have good relationships. I got a body of work. Some people like me, some people don't, I guess. So that for me is the way I have to network, and then I have to secure that. But that doesn't mean that Joe Filmmaker in Nashville is going to get the biggest movie star in the world, but they might get somebody who's local in their community.
I didn't know you knew Joe Filmmaker. He's been doing great stuff here in Nashville.
So, but there's plenty of people. There's musicians in Nashville, right? There's sportscasters if you make a sports movie. There's so many people that have a voice now that can help you elevate your film. And then that leads to other stuff. And it's, but you got to make sure that it's somebody that brings some value. Yeah. And in the eyes of whatever you're trying to do next. So if you're trying to get distribution, you got to make sure it's somebody that brings value in distribution. If you're trying to get marketing eyeballs, then it's somebody that brings value in marketing. I've been a financier for movies for a long time. I mean, I can't tell you how many people have brought me a scripted project and they're like, "Oh man, well, I've got the I've got the production designer from this movie, and I've got the sound guy from this movie, and I've got the casting director from this movie, and I'm like, I bet you they're great, but like at this moment, I'm in the business of writing checks for a movie that I think are going to make money. None of these people are going to drive actual box office. They may help create a great movie, but they're not necessarily the marquee names that are going to bring me value as a financier, knowing that I'm here to make money through distribution. So bring me somebody that has value for me as a financier and a distributor. And so I think it's important to kind of come up with that. But it also depends on like what your goal is too. If your goal is to just make something great and throw it up on YouTube and see what happens, well, that's a different bar, And so everybody can get to somebody that brings some type of value for your project.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you mentioned about everybody knows somebody, it really resonates with me because the way that I was raised was like more private. So that's why like social media is more difficult for me to just put my whole life out there and do all this. And I have to find the appropriate types of ways to get myself out, like a podcast, right? Where I have a little bit more control over that environment. I'm just not putting everything out there. But the privacy aspect of it, or the kind of like hiding your life or just keeping it to yourself, doesn't lend itself to everyone knows someone. And what I mean by that is this. There's this old adage, I'm sure it's a biblical reference, but it's basically ask and you shall receive. And that reference to me is, you could both call it spiritual and secular, in that it's absolutely true. Because what it really, and this is something I've learned over the past couple of years, it is crazy how if you ask, and what that means is just tell people what you're doing.
Yes.
That's it. Or ask for help.
Immediately agree with
in
this.
Doing what you, just say it. And you'll be surprised the number of people that start to raise their hand and say, because they like you, or they love you, or they know about you. We try to
keep our art secret sometimes. We try to keep the ambition secret.
Exactly. Because as soon as you say it, and it could be to anyone, you could be literally saying to someone at the grocery store, hey, I just got the 10-pack of Red Bull because I'm working on this film about combat chaplains. And that person's like, oh my God, my dad is a combat chaplain. Boom. And I think that's it. Everyone knows someone. So I think the key for me is continuing to emphasize the fact that ask and you shall receive. Just say what it is you're doing, and the universe will probably provide.
But Nick, that's such a great phrase, and you're so right about it. But I think it's the asking part that sometimes is hard for people.
Yes.
For all the reasons you point out, right? Like, but like I think about like my wife. My wife is way smarter than me. She went to undergrad at Johns Hopkins. She has a master's from Columbia. She has a law degree from Penn. She went to Oxford. She's getting her doctorate at USC. Like,
wow.
She collects like graduate degrees.
Check. Yep.
So, but she is terrified of asking for help for a whole bunch of reasons that can be a different podcast.
Right.
Like,
yep.
She doesn't like to hear the word no. Like it really messes her up. And so she doesn't, and in her mind, she doesn't want the world to owe her anything. Wow. So like she doesn't want anybody to owe her anything. So if she goes and she asks you, hey, could you help me with this? Or, hey, could I pick your brain? Or, hey, who do you know? Can you, or, hey, I'm raising money, can I pitch you? She's terrified to ask those things because she don't want to hear no. And if she hears yes, that's almost more scary because then like she'll owe that person.
Yeah, got it.
So I think you have to have, the balls to just sort of be like, I got to kiss a lot of frogs in this thing, and I'm going to hear no, and I'm just going to go and I'm going to ask. And sometimes that's hard for people, I think.
That's great. And I have one last one, man. And I think that for the combat chaplains, I think we have that answer to this question, so you could just provide it on anything else. But how do you find the inspiration for the projects that you get into? Because there are somewhat varied. Or your chaplains, you've got black soldiers, you've got even back to the films that you did, with the teenage type movies. How do you find the inspiration for the various things that you get involved in? It's
a good question. And I think over my career, my movies have gone through different phases. So like I'm inspired by different things at different times in my life. And a lot of times those connect to things I was going through in my life. You know, so when I was in my 20s, I was like, teenage movies, that's what I want. And girls, I'm into it. And then, you know, I kind of found myself growing up and I made some romantic comedies. And then for a while, I was kind of the sequel guy and made some sequels to like Daddy Daycare and some of those types of movies. And like there's different stuff. And so what's interesting for me is that I'm probably atypical in terms of that inspiration, because there are people that I know and I have an incredible respect for, and maybe they're more creative than I am, but they truly like wake up with an inspiration. They have this idea and they can't put it away until they get it made as a movie or TV show. And I've never been that way. I've always been somebody that somebody brings me something and I spark to it, as opposed to me saying, oh, I'm inspired by this idea, I'm going to go and like proactively do it, right? And so I become proactive, but I start by being reactive. Like, and this Combat Chaplains thing is a perfect example. Like Mike Sullivan at Paulus Productions, he had that idea. And he came to me and he's like, well, you've got some credibility with the Army, and it seems like they probably would trust you, and they're not paying attention to me, and I need that Department of Defense contract if I'm going to make this movie. Can you get involved? And I was like, oh, sure. That's pretty interesting. Tell me about the story. And the more I got into it, then obviously I went from being reactive to proactive. And that's ultimately what inspired me, because I kind of had to do my own research to get into it. Like I wasn't just inspired with this little nugget of an idea. And I think that's actually been very consistent throughout my career. And I think it's you know, if you're not wired to be that person, which I'm not, to be like, oh, I've got this great idea, I've got to make it, then you also have to be willing to say yes when the universe, you know, puts opportunities in front of you. Yeah. And I think some people forget that. They feel like, oh, I'm just waiting for that one perfect project. Like, I've made a bunch of shitty projects, perfect projects for me, just by leaning into them and really finding inspiration in, you know, an opportunity that presented itself to me. It's like the old story about like guy's in his house, big flood comes, crawls up to the roof, you know, a helicopter comes by, he's like, no, God will save me. And boat comes by, no, God will save me. Dude comes by, he's like, no, God will save me. Guy dies, goes up to heaven. God's like, dude, I sent you a canoe. I sent you a boat. You weren't open to it, man. So I kind of feel like that's, you know, that's who I am. I'm inspired by other people, and then I kind of take it. I've always been the guy that like knows how to do, kind of take somebody that's got a spark who doesn't quite know what to do with it. I'm like, oh, I can help you. I know how to do that, right? And that's
me and Nick are exactly like that. We're like that so to the core. It's crazy. You use the term lean in. That's exactly what we do. We love to collaborate, and when someone says something, Nick did it a few times. I think we've both done it a few times, even in this conversation. You say a thing, and it's like, how about this? Yes, and how about this? What if you did this? What if there was a hashtag for this? Or what if you tried this approach? And that's just that leaning in, where someone inspires you. The collaboration in film is unlike collaboration in any other art form. And you fall in love with that. You want that. You run towards that. And even if you're not the one that came up with the idea, you're leaning in and you're, like you said, sparked by it. I can completely relate with that.
Yeah, and I have to say, I'll end. I don't have any other questions, but I have this comment for Rich. You must wake up and go to sleep every day with a heart filled with gratitude, because all of these ideas are like little gifts left at your doorstep. And then you're able to take those gifts that people give you, these ideas, these passions, make them your own, and then create these wonderful things out of them. Every time you look back at a project, you must think, wow, what a gift that someone has brought to me and brought into my life. It's such an amazing thing.
Yeah. Well, don't get me wrong, man. Like, I still quit like 3 times a week. but it's down from 7.
So, good job. You know, well done.
and I think you got to be look, you got to find the inspiration somewhere, right? So if you're not the guy that naturally, wakes up with that light bulb moment, like, then be open to it. Like I mentioned earlier, I was one of the founders of the VIX streaming service, and so when I started that thing, it was there's two stories. There's a public story.
Can we contextualize that for the audience, Rich? I'm sorry. This is the largest Spanish-speaking streaming service in the world, right?
Yes.
At the time, for sure. So go ahead. I just want to make sure the audience knew this is a large streaming service with lots of eyeballs.
Yeah, no. So, I mean, to put it in perspective, it's now owned by Televisa Univision. We sold it to them a few years ago. VIX has got about 75,000 hours of content, which is a lot. Yeah. It's, at least last time I looked, it was the most used Spanish language app of any kind in the U.S. We often beat Netflix for being the most used entertainment service in many countries in Latin America on any given day. Wow. We were Apple's TV App of the Year, which is the first time a Spanish language app has ever won the top global honor. At Apple, we produce about 7,000 hours of original scripted content per year. So, it's just pretty big scale to that.
Remarkable.
It started with, it went through, it's like anything else. It went through a long journey of stuff. And originally, the streaming service that I started was called Póngalo, which in Spanish means like play it, like put in the tape and play it. It's kind of what it means. And then I acquired 7 different companies over the course of 3 or 4 years, merged it with a company called VIX that was a big social media player that had 100 million Spanish-speaking eyeballs on Facebook. We built that up even further, sold it to Univision. Once it's been in the Univision machine, it's gotten even bigger. And each time I was taking on more partners and really sort of turning it into something. We then combined it with some other streaming services that we bought at Televisa Univision, one called Pantalla that we bought from Lionsgate, one called Prende, one called Blem that was in Mexico. I mean, so it's got a long origin story, but ultimately it started because I had invested in a company that owned a bunch of Mexican movies, and after a very inappropriately short amount of time, the whole thing basically blew up, and because of the way I had invested in this, I wound up owning 300 Mexican movies. And I'm like, what the hell am I going to do with these? And I stuck them on YouTube, and people came out of the woodwork. And I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Maybe there's some pent-up demand here, and maybe Spanish speakers are underserved, and they're not getting these movies that were originally produced in Spanish. And sure enough, the more I kind of leaned into that, I was like, oh, well, all they're getting are Disney movies dubbed into Spanish. And that's not super culturally authentic. And so it ultimately led me to do more and more stuff. Now, like the public version is like, oh, I grew up in Texas and Hispanic media has been a part of my world. And, I was a visionary and I saw a very clear lane and that kind of stuff. But the reality of it is it was just like a failed investment. And, for a guy that doesn't speak Spanish, I'm like, what am I going to do with these things? And then I realized, oh, well, there's other companies out there like this one that had blown up. And these guys own 300 Mexican movies, and those guys own 400, and those guys own 600. And pretty soon I looked up and I had 1,800 Mexican movies. And then I was like, well, what am I going to do with these? And, you just keep steamrolling. And I think that's the way, at least movies for me have really worked, is just to, find the inspiration somewhere and then lean into it. So, yeah, Nick, I think you said it really well.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I'll just actually, before we wrap up here, because Rich, you've been just so incredibly generous with your time and your thoughts and your opinions. This has been really rewarding for me personally, but just an excellent conversation and knowledge for the audience. But I spent some time in Mexico, and if you go to YouTube in Mexico, you will discover all these musicians you've never heard of a day in your life that have 100 million views on a video. You're like, what? Or sometimes 800 million views. And you're like, never even heard this person's name before. And that will shock you. For those who don't know, Mexico is a huge demographic for YouTube. It's like in the top 5. So from viewership standpoint. And the third thing I'll say about it is when you spend time down there, there's an incredibly talented number of filmmakers in Mexico that are just ready to explode. The whole area is ready to explode with talent. And there's a lot of artisans and artists and creatives and people with enormous ingenuity in Mexico. So shout out to Mexico. There's my little love letter to you, Mexico, and all the folks in Mexico. By the way, we have what's our audience in Mexico on YouTube, Nick? Is it like
it's growing? I mean, I think it's getting to it's started at like 2%, is moving to like 8% of some of the subscribers and viewership that we're getting. I think it's moving. At one point, I think the views were up to like 13%. Right, it's increasing, and we love to see that because we've got Senegalese viewers and Indonesian viewers, U.S., Canada. So it's great to see the viewership grow in all of these places.
Yeah, so shout out to Mexico. Shout out to subscribers in Mexico. And before we let you leave here, Rich, we got to ask you, what does it mean for you to make it? What does making it mean to you? How about I'll put it that way?
Oh, making it for me is just being happy. There's an easier way to make a buck in the world than doing what I do. I always seem to take the impossible task. Making movies, like, it's impossible. Why would anyone in their right mind subject themselves to this? Like, if I didn't just love it and it made me happy, like, I'd go back to Texas and I'd sell stocks and, have a really lovely life and not have to fight traffic 2 hours a day like I do in Los Angeles. And, so for me, it's about feeling happy and fulfilled. And that's the benefit I get out of doing what I do. And so I've got a little technology part of my brain. I've got a little storytelling part of my brain. Sometimes I get to combine those and do interesting things. Sometimes I kind of keep them separate. All of that makes me happy. So, and I would be incredibly unhappy if I was just like doing one thing and one thing only, and it didn't have some creative bent to it. Like, even, I'm kind of at the part of the leading edge of AI. I'm running a company that does AI. Well, I still get to be a storyteller there.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm out, we just raised $20 million. Like, you don't get that money because you walk in and can't tell a story. Like, if I have any arguable skill set that I get from being a filmmaker, it's the ability to walk into a room and tell a good 3-act story. And like, if I leave Hollywood, nobody cares if I can get Tom Hanks's agent on the phone in the real world. They're like, if I'm interviewing for a job at Microsoft, they're going to be like, doesn't apply to me, dude.
Right.
But like, the ability to walk in and tell a story, that's applicable in any industry. And that makes me so happy. And so I'd say for me, making it is just about being happy.
Here. And intern Sam will tell you, we tell him everything is storytelling. Everything. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter what you do in life. Story is king. That's right, PB. And I love that. That's a perfect answer. You hear that, folks, right from the horse's mouth, right from Rich's mouth. Optimize for happy. Can you tell everybody where to find you on social media, where to find you on the internet, where they can see your work, see your films, maybe even see your latest film, but if you want to promote more, feel free. And then, if you're brave enough, maybe even contact you directly. So it's up to you. Dealer's choice there.
Wow, a lot of choices. Mm-hmm. I would be a bad filmmaker if I didn't say, go check out Fighting Spirit, A Combat Chaplain's Journey. Obviously, we're still in the theaters this week after our big kind of Veterans Day release. And so the best place to find where the movie is or it's coming to is to go to fightingspiritfilm.com. Okay. So it's fightingspiritfilm.com. We'll be announcing streaming plans at some point in the near future. We got to catch our breath after the big theatrical. And so that's a good place for that. And then I guess for me personally, probably the easiest place is LinkedIn. That seems to be where I spend my days lately. So it's, linkedin.com/Richard Hull, Hull. And you can always contact me that way.
All right. That's beautiful. You heard it right here. Go to fightingspiritfilm.com, and then you can find Richard Hull on LinkedIn. Just search for Richard Hull. He will come right up. That's Hull. And drop him a line. Tell him what you thought about the episode. Tell him what you thought about his feedback. And if you have any questions, I'm sure when he has the time, he'll get back to you and help you out with your filmmaking journey as well. Speaking of filmmaking journey, that's what we're all about here at the Make It Podcast. You can find us at themakeitpodcast.com. You can find us on social media at _Make It Podcast on X and on Instagram. You can also find us on TikTok with the same handle. Please follow us there, subscribe to us there, ask us questions there, and we will answer right away. If you want to reach out to Nick and talk about his experience at Vanderbilt, you can do that. That's at nick@bonsai.film. That's a email address. Yep. And if you want to reach out to me, you can find me on X, formerly Twitter, at Flaming Your Heart. But you can always just search for Chris Barkley, and I will come right up. Guess what? We have wonderful apparel at Cotton Bureau. I love this partnership we have with them. They reject 90% of all designs, but our design is in the shop. So go to cottonbureau.com, search for the Make It Podcast. Our shop will come right up. We have velvety, buttery Nick t-shirts, long sleeves, cottony, lovely, like a fleece-like hoodies and crew neck sweaters, and the dopest hats around with a really, really dope design. So wear your filmmaking journey on your body, right? Walk around with the Make It tag. We have, I believe, Nick, we have between 8 and 10 cities now. You can see I'm wearing here Tokyo, but we've got Toronto, we've got Washington, D.C., Nashville, L.A., Sydney, all over. So London. So wear your pride on your chest, wear it on your head, whatever. And we're going to bring more cities as we go along. And I think, Nick, did I say it all? Is that all we want?
I think you said it all.
No, you know what?
Are we ready?
That was a test. You were wrong.
No.
On YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. It means a lot. It is really important. So for all those that are subscribing to our growing channel, we really, really deeply appreciate you. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button, hit the like button. It means a ton. Feel free to comment. We answer 100% of every single comment that's dropped either on our polls or our videos, whatever it may be. So feel free to engage. We love that stuff, and we deeply, deeply appreciate you. Now with that, Nick, can you please leave us with the credo?
Oh, your pauses were not as pregnant, my friend.
Well, I've been warned.
So with that, yeah. Well, first of all, of course, I have to say a big thank you to Rich for spending this time with us today. This has been awesome. Like Chris said, we've learned a lot about, I think, the filmmaking industry, your journey, ourselves in the conversation, which is always a huge bonus for us. 100%. So we want to say we really do appreciate you and the time that you spent with us today. And with that, I'll also have to say to our friends, our fans, our filmmaking community out there, be better, be creative, be engaged.
And thank you for listening. Rich, Nick, talk to you soon.
Yeah, man, this is great. I appreciate all of you.
Sam, Papa Bear, we love you. Appreciate it.
Peace, guys.
Peace.
It is Ryan here, and I have a question for you. What do you do when you win? Like, are you a fist pumper, a woohooer, a hand clapper, a high fiver? If you want to hone in on those winning moves, check out Chumba Casino. Choose from hundreds of social casino style games for your chance to redeem serious cash prizes. There are new game releases weekly, plus free daily bonuses. So don't wait. Start having the most fun ever at ChumbaCasino.com.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply.